In the previous lesson, I asked you to find another problem in the code that I wrote. I hinted that in our current unit test, we're looking for a hard-coded string contract ID, and we're passing that into getById in order to create a contract that has the contract ID of this hard-coded value contract ID. But what would happen if we tried a different contract ID? What if we were to try, for example, expired contract ID? Will we get the results that we expected? And so to answer that question in this lesson, what I want to do is start by creating a test for expired contracts. So our contract repository stub should be able to return both non-expired and expired contracts. So let's test that. What I'm going to do, just to get started here quickly and easily, is that the test will almost be identical. The only thing that will really change is we're looking for expired contract ID instead of contract ID. And furthermore, let's go ahead and change the name of this from valid to expired contract ID returns an expired contract. Okay. And then the other thing we want to do is this assertion to make sure that previously that the expiration date was in the future. Now we want to do the opposite. To test for an expired contract, we want to see and make sure that the expiration is in the past. So in that case, we'll just switch the order of these. I could have just changed the operator, but I prefer to keep them kind of flow like an English sentence, okay, where datetime now is greater than rather than less than. I don't know. It's a little picky thing on my part, but at any rate, I think that's all the changes that we need to make. So when we actually run these unit tests, you'll see that we get a failure for the new unit test. And if we take a look at the reason why that is, it says that the assert.isTrue failed. Okay, so what really needs to happen here is that we need to add a little bit of logic, or I should say this is one approach we could take. So go to our contract repository and add a little extra check here. So, all right, so what we can do is this. We'll just do a quick check. So we'll say if the contract ID is equal to contract ID, then we'll perform one, else if contract ID equals expired contract ID. All right, so here we'll just go contract DTO dot expiration date, and we'll set that equal to datetime.now.addDays, and we'll add 1. And otherwise, what we'll do is subtract 1 day. Now let's go ahead and get rid of this. Everything else can stay the same. All right, so now let's run our unit tests, and you can see they both passed. And while this works, we can already see the fallacy in this approach. Every time that we want to test for any new conditions or use new contract IDs, we've got to add a new else-if statement to this block of code. That's definitely one way to go, but it will only work in the simplest of scenarios, like the case that we have here. Once our contract gets more complicated, then we're going to need a more robust approach. So we need a different type of test double. The stub that we've been using has helped us out quite a bit, but it'd be really cool if we could utilize something a little more powerful. So what I'm going to do is use a tool, a third-party framework called FakeItEasy. It builds itself as a cross between a fake and a mock. And so if you take a look at this URL, we've already looked at it one time, a little bit earlier in this series. Fowler's article, Mocks Aren't Stubs. He uses a definition from this book, XUnit Test Patterns, as the definition for fakes and mocks. And he says that a fake object actually has working implementations, but usually takes some shortcut, which makes them not suitable for production. A mock, on the other hand, is what we're talking about here, objects pre-programmed with expectations, which form a specification of the calls that they're expected to receive. And so there are subtle distinctions between the two, and honestly, I'm not sure I completely understand the ramifications of them. However, the great thing about FakeItEasy is that you get both sides of this functionality. You don't need to understand the differences. It'll allow you to isolate the exact scenario in your production code, in your domain code. In this case, our domain our domain project that we want to tackle in our method under test. So what we're going to do is we're going to use NuGet. So go to Tools, Library Package Manager, Manage NuGet Packages for Solution, and I'm going to type in FakeItEasy and hit enter on my keyboard and let it search. Alright, so the next thing we'll do is click the install button next to FakeItEasy, and it'll ask where do we want to install this. And for now, all we need to do is to install it in our test. So I'm going to deselect the checkboxes next to the domain and the persistence projects and then click OK. It'll take a moment or two to install. And so we can now close the Manage NuGet Packages dialog. All right, so now comes the fun part. What we want to do is create a fake version of our iContract repository, and we're going to do that here in our test. So FakeItEasy can look for an interface, and it can dynamically create an object that conforms to that interface, but it's an imposter. It's a fake. It has no real implementation. So what you do is say, all right, you're going to act like you are an object that conforms to iContract repository. Now, somebody might come along and ask you some questions. When they ask you a question like get by ID and they give you this string as an input parameter, then you give them back this. And what that allows us to do is to isolate the code that we're trying to test. In this case, we're trying to test our contract service.cs. Specifically, we're trying to test our get by ID method, right? And so it's going to, we're going to give it a fake version of the contract repository. So when it calls this get by ID, we're going to say, okay, whenever they ask for the get by ID, give them a contract DTO and give them with these properties, okay? Make it think like you're a real contract repository when in fact you're not. So that's what we're doing here. And what that allows us to do is just test this code and nothing else. Pretty cool. All right, so let's go ahead and focus in on our test. And I think what we're going to do here is we're going to create a test initialize, and this will get run once before our test methods will be run. Okay, so I'm going to create a method called initialize, and I adorn it with this test initialize attribute. And so what we want to do is we're going to create, let's create a private iContract repository called contract repository. All right, we're going to have to import, or we're going to have to use this using statement to bring in the interfaces namespace. And now in initialize, what we want to do is set that private contract repository member equal to a fake. All right, and so here's where we need to use FakeItEasy, and so I'm going to add this using statement, FakeItEasy. So here we are. Now we have a using statement with FakeItEasy. So a fake iContract repository. All right, and so now we have an imposter, a fake that we can use. And so notice the fluid style interface of FakeItEasy. It reads like an English sentence. Set the contract repository to a fake iContract repository. All right. So furthermore, now we're going to need to comb through the rest of the contract test and look for the concrete instantiation of the old contract repository and replace it with our new fake one. So what we'll do in both of our unit tests is comment out that first line where we create an instance of this concrete contract repository, and we're going to replace it with this, our private member, which is the fake. We'll do it again here. And there. Great. Okay. And so we're no longer referencing the acme.maintenance.persistence object anymore. And so we could even remove that reference from our project, from our test project completely, and actually even remove the entire project from the solution. However, because I know that I'm going to need it again someday when I actually go to create a real persistence layer, I'm going to keep it in my project for now. I can, however, remove its using statement from this class, okay, or this file rather. All right, so we're not done with FakeItEasy just yet. We've created the fake, but we haven't told it how it can really pull off this fake, this being an imposter. So we have to give it one more instruction, and that is called an expectation. So basically, we're going to say expect to be asked for this method and passed in this input parameter, or this set of input parameters. When a caller asks for that, give them this. All right, so that's what we're going to do next. So here we go. A call to get by ID with the contract ID. We want to return a new contract DTO, and we'll go ahead and set its members as follows. So the contract ID should be contract ID, and go ahead and set that expiration date equal to date time.now.add days 1. All right, and what I'd like to do is break this out a little bit onto separate lines because it makes it easier to read. So I typically do something like this. There, easier to read for me at least. All right, so in this case, we're faking the contract repository. So when a class, most likely the contract service, calls the getById method and passes the contract ID in, a hard-coded word, contract ID, then give it back a new contract DTO object that's been initialized with a valid contract ID and expiration date. That's pretty sneaky, right? It's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and see it at work. And so you can see that that our first unit test actually works. The one that's testing the valid contract ID. So FakeItEasy was able to help us isolate the domain layer project by faking a dependency, the contract repository, allowing us to focus on just the code under test, namely the contract service. So now we can be sure that the contract service's getById does work, at least for this first unit test, this first use case. But something's amiss for the second case, the expired contract ID case. Why do you suppose that happened? Because we've not set up an expectation for that scenario. We didn't tell FakeItEasy to expect the expired contract ID. What should I didn't know what to tell it when it asked me for an expired contract ID. You never told me. All right, so we're going to fix that problem right now, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, I'll tell you what, before we tackle that, I want to clean things up just a little bit. I don't like having all these magic strings laying around because it's easy to mistype a magic string. And so what I'm going to use instead is a constant. So let's take a look at how to create a constant. I'm not sure that we've ever talked about this before, but they're perfect for situations like this, where you need a variable that you want to use throughout your code. You want to give that variable a name that's descriptive of its purpose, but you never expect that value to change throughout the body of your code. That's what a constant is for. And it's perfect for scenarios like this where you're removing these magic strings. And by magic strings, I mean strings that are just, we've given them some meaning by what's encoded inside of the open and closed double quotes, but it's just arbitrary, and we could accidentally mistype it because it's not strongly typed. I'm sure there's a better definition out there for the word magic string than what I just used, but that's ultimately what the problem is here. So let's go ahead and create a private constant, private const string, and we'll create one for valid contract ID equals contract ID. Oops. And then we will replace every usage of this magic string contract ID with valid contract ID. All right. I feel much better about this already. So that will do it. That's everywhere it's been used. There. Great. Okay. And so now what we want to do is implement the expired contract ID. So let's go ahead and start with creating a constant for that. Private const string expired contract ID equals expired contract ID. Great. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and create the new expectation. So a call to, notice its use of lambdas here, get by ID with an expired contract ID this time. Then we want to return, what do we want to happen here? We want to return basically the same thing this time. Returns new contract DTO. This time the contract ID will be the expired contract ID constant, and then the expiration date will be datetime.now.add days, and we'll just use -1 there. And let's go ahead and pop this onto its own line, and like so. Beautiful. Okay, very good. So now the next thing we'll want to do is replace the magic string for expired contract ID. And we'll place it over here as well. Great. Okay, and so now this time when we run all the unit tests, hopefully they'll both work, and they do. Very good. Okay, so we have successfully introduced FakeItEasy into our unit testing, providing us more options and greater flexibility to set an expectation, and then allow FakeItEasy to make what are called happy noises that give our domain class what it needs to function. Moreover, it allows us to isolate the domain class and only test that, not everything else, not all the dependencies and all the other layers, all right? So despite the fact that it does depend on other classes and layers to do work, we can abstract all that away and just give the system under test, the method under test, exactly what it needs to operate, and so we can test just that. So we've only scratched the surface with FakeItEasy. I'm going to create a whole mini-series on FakeItEasy and demo most of its functionality there. But for now, we've got it configured and working in our project. And so next up, what I want to do is take a new look at our contract service class, because there's one more improvement that I want to make there. So we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.